Everything they do is done for men to see. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted in the marketplaces and to have men call them rabbi. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have only one master, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth Father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called teacher, for you have one teacher, the Christ. The greatest among you will be your servant, for whoever exalts him will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted.
Thank you. So we're continuing along this morning in our study of the book of Proverbs. I've been enjoying working through this content with you. Something I'd mentioned in your bulletins, you probably have some little half-page cardstock colorful thing called the Character Challenge. Hopefully you've been participating in that. But if you're visiting with us or you haven't been here in a few weeks, that's something that we're making available weekly so that if you want to try and work on applying some of these things to your life as you go, each week we have a different theme. We've got some Bible verses picked out from that theme from the book of Proverbs, and we've also got a few discussion questions. I would also mention if you'd like to receive those by email, even if you have to be out some weeks, you can still have those arrive in your inbox. They go out every Sunday at 2 p.m. And included with the verses and the questions is a couple of supplemental types of videos and some other things that might be helpful to you in working on applying these things to your life. So if you haven't signed up for that, would love to have you go to kingscrossingcoc.com to our website. You can go to that /character, or you can just go to our website. There's a tab called Quick Links, and you'll be able to find the Character Challenge there if you'd like to subscribe. One of the things I can remember as a child, there used to be a lot of commercials about the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes. You remember those old commercials? As a kid, I could just fully envision that this was going to happen for us one day if my dad would just buy a couple of magazines. You know, there would be this prize patrol, and they'd have the cameras and the lights and the cameras flashing, and then they would show up and knock on someone's door, and they'd open the door, and then everyone starts screaming, and they hand them the sign that says, you just won $1 million, or you just won $5,000 a week for life. And I was thinking as a kid, I could just see so vividly that really happening. I was looking at my door, and I just knew one of those days they were likely to show up at my door with that incredible news that everything has just changed. Have you ever imagined what it would be like to have the prize patrol showing up at your front door with a big sign with your name on it and a check and a bunch of balloons? Like what a cool thing that would be to experience in life. One of the companions that we've made in the book of Proverbs, we've referred to as Lady Wisdom. She's already been introduced to us, but what we learn here in Proverbs chapter 3 about Lady Wisdom is that when you make her welcome in your home, she is actually the kind of person who shows up bringing gifts. She is the type of person who shows up at your door bringing you things that are great blessings, things that you really would want to have. I would invite you to open your Bibles to Proverbs chapter 3. I'm going to be skipping around to several passages. The verses will be on the screen, but you might enjoy being able to have that as a reference this morning in Proverbs 3. So we're introduced here to some of what Lady Wisdom does for those who welcome her. It says in verse 13, "Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding, for she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. She is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her. Those who hold her fast will be blessed." So this section actually begins with a beatitude, doesn't it? Just like the beatitudes that Jesus gave, it begins by pronouncing blessed. Blessed are those who find wisdom. How good it is to be a person who finds wisdom. What unique favor you receive from God by finding and welcoming wisdom into your life. Better than riches Even better, he would say, than the prize patrol at your door, because the kinds of prizes, the kinds of rewards that she brings are even better than what the world can offer. It says, when Lady Wisdom knocks on your door, she shows up, and in her right hand, she has length of days. She has long life. When you welcome her, she extends your life, makes it meaningful. And in her left hand, she comes carrying riches and honor. Amazingly, it's all the kinds of things that people normally seek, the things for which people would compromise their integrity to say, I'll do anything I can to get more riches. I would do anything I can to make a name for myself. Ironically, in fact, when you seek God first, when you seek to be wise, when you welcome wisdom into your life, those things that men most desire are simply a side benefit of receiving wisdom, but wisdom is the true benefit that we should long for. I love the way it describes her as a person whose ways are pleasant. Take a moment and think about that for a second. I'm sure you've got certain people in your life. If I said, imagine someone in your life whose ways are pleasant, whose paths are peace, I bet you can put a face on that, can't you? There's someone in your life who has that effect of just being pleasant, being peaceful, and I'd be willing to say that person has probably almost never gotten on your nerves. When you see a person who's peaceful, who's pleasant, who has that way about them, they're always a welcome guest, aren't they? It's always better having them there, because when you have a really peaceful presence who's not worried about things, who's operating out of faith and courage, it has this trickle-down effect, doesn't it? And everyone else becomes a little more peaceful because that person is a rock for the rest of us. That's the kind of presence that wisdom has when it's welcomed in our life. Ways that are pleasant, a person who brings peace with them. A couple of years ago, some parents came up with a really funny idea for how to announce that their baby had been born. If we could go to that next slide. I thought this was terrific. Can you see that? It's a baby in a box with an owner's manual. A lot of people will talk about some of the things in life that are challenging. It's because they don't come with owner's manuals, right? Your children don't arrive really with owner's manuals. Like, there's a lot of stuff you can read, but I've had many people tell me, I read all the James Dobson books, and I read all the books about this and that, and my kid didn't fit that box. My kid was different than that. It wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be, and they can put it all out in these charts and diagrams, but the way it actually works is not so simple. But just the same, the closest we can get to an owner's manual for life is the wisdom that comes from God. The passage continues in verse 19. By wisdom, the Lord laid the earth's foundations. By understanding, he set the heavens in place. By his knowledge, the watery depths were divided, and the clouds let drop the dew. So why is it that we would want to seek out wisdom? It's because if you want to understand what holds the world together and makes it run, it's the wisdom of God that accomplishes this. God creates the world in his wisdom. He rules it in his wisdom, and by understanding his wisdom and seeking his wisdom, it's the best glimpse you've got at an owner's manual for how this place is actually supposed to operate. The world is built on wisdom. And in fact, we're still in the hot pursuit of uncovering wisdom all the time. The things that God has even built into his creation. What is the modern obsession with scientific progress, if not a pursuit of wisdom that God has built into the cosmos? We look into space, we look into the atom, we look every direction, and we continue to find wisdom that God has already placed there, just waiting for us to uncover it. There's so much there to be mined. It's so much depth to be experienced. So I think this passage warns us, encourages us. If you want to understand how the world operates, then get to know the one who made it. Get to know his thought processes for how he went about doing the things that he did. So what I'm going to do this morning, I wanted to walk through the first 12 verses of Proverbs chapter 3. We've started by talking about the destination. The destination you want to get to is that you want Lady Wisdom to show up at your house and bring you gifts. You want her to show up and bring you blessings and to make your life better and easier and more peaceful. So that's the destination we're trying to get to, but there's a path that leads to that we have to choose to walk on. And so the first 12 verses of Proverbs 3 lay out for us what that path looks like. Something that's fascinating about these first 12 verses is that they function as a kind of call and response. You know, sometimes we have songs we sing where maybe the guy sings something and the girls repeat, or the song leader sings something and everyone else echoes a response. These first 12 verses work like that, and that all of the odd-numbered verses are the obligations of people who want to reach that place of blessing. So if you want to follow the path that leads to blessing, you pay attention to verses 1 and 3 and 5 and 7 and so on until you get to verse 11. And then as they rotate through, the response and the even-numbered verses are what God will do for people who walk on that path. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with the odd-numbered verses, and then I'm going to talk about the even-numbered verses. So these are the obligations of a person. If you want to have Lady Wisdom bring blessing to your life, do these things. Verse 1 begins, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." So if you look at those first 3 verses, 1 and 3 and 5, there's a theme going on there, isn't there? It's the heart that just keeps showing up. If we want to be living in a way that honors God, that gets us to the right kind of place, it all has to begin with our motives and our intentions, doesn't it? Jesus himself said it's out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks. It's whatever's going on inside of us that produces our actions and our words and our choices. So if we want to walk that path that leads to blessing and wisdom, we've got to ask those questions about our motives. Why am I doing the things that I'm doing? Am I actively seeking out God? Am I showing love for God? Am I writing down the words of God on the tablet of my heart? Am I internalizing the Word of God so much that it is able to shape me and impact me? Trusting the Lord, not leaning on my own understanding. Allowing love and faithfulness. I love the language here, that love and faithfulness. When you think of what a person looks like, we all have ways that we kind of adorn ourselves. He says, let love and faithfulness be the things that people see when they look at you. That you're just full of love, you're a faithful person, you honor your word, you're consistent in your character. Let those things be the thing that people notice when they watch your life and the way that you are. It continues with a similar thought in verse 7. "Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil." So important to trust God's word above our own reasoning. Now, the way that culture works is that there are some aspects of Christianity that culture wants to affirm. Culture wants us to be nice people and kind people, but there's a lot of ways that culture would call on us to abandon the teachings of God and be selfish and self-centered and just do what feels good and don't worry about the consequences. I mean, there's a way that would seem right to the world, but being a Christian, walking this good path means that before all else, I am going to submit my life to God for His approval. And even what would seem right in the eyes of the world, if it's not right in the sight of God, I don't do it. A similar thought comes out of Psalm 30, beginning in verse 6. David talks about what this is like. He says, "When I felt secure, I said, I will never be shaken," which is the way people think, right? When they're sitting fat and happy and it feels like their life is in order, you say, well, now I'm invincible. I've got everything I need. Nobody can touch me. No one's going to outdo me. "When I felt secure, I said, I'll never be shaken. Lord, when you favored me, you made my royal mountain stand firm." David's sitting on the royal mountain, feeling as secure as could be. "But when you hid your face, I was shattered." At whatever point God doesn't support what you're doing, God refrains from giving you the level of blessing that He has been, when your plans aren't established, when the things you were counting on suddenly fall through, then you have that aha awakening moment that really God was the only one holding me together to begin with. Not the mountain, not my possessions, not my talents. It was God who was sustaining me all along. So we continue in verse 9. "Honor the Lord with your wealth with the first fruits of all your crops. Again, these are things that we have to do if we're wanting to walk that path that leads to blessing. It is actually a deeply spiritual matter what we do with our financial blessings. And David did a great job in his devotional earlier. Truly, we have been a very blessed congregation. We've got many opportunities in front of us, a lot of things that we're trying to do. But with your possessions, are you honoring the Lord with your wealth? Are you giving the Lord the first fruits of the things that you've prospered? What about your home? Are you using your home as a place to practice Christian hospitality, or is it just your personal castle that you want to have to somehow impress people? What about the vehicle that you drive? Is your vehicle getting used in the service of the kingdom? Is it taking you places so that you can show up and volunteer or maybe offer a ride to someone who's needing it? Or is it just a symbol of your status somehow? Where does God sit in your list of priorities and the way that you treat the things you've been given materially? So something that Scripture teaches is very paradoxical. If you want to experience more riches, more blessings, more finances, the best thing you could do is to give more of it away. It seems paradoxical. I've known some very affluent people in my life who have been exceedingly generous with all they've been given, who have told me with great sincerity, no matter how much I've tried, I have never been able to outgive God. The more I try to overwhelm God and give something beautiful and generous to Him, He turns right around and blesses me even more. But the path that leads to blessing is one that also requires sacrifice and a willingness to give back. God knows where we're storing up our treasures, whether we're storing up treasures in heaven or if we're just worried about what we can hang on to while we're down here. Verse 11 says, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline and do not resent His rebuke." So part of really allowing the Lord's teachings to go deeply in our hearts is to allow them to have authority over us. And if I'm living in such a way that's not according to God's will, and I read His Word that reveals what He wants, it feels like discipline, doesn't it? It's not fun to accept an answer that sounds like no, but when God doesn't give me the things that I thought He should, does that mean that I just take my ball and go home? Do I just pull back and refrain? Do I disengage? Or do I accept that maybe God could help me to grow through this thing that I'm experiencing? Don't despise His discipline and don't resent His rebuke. So we have these odd-numbered verses that talk about our path. If we want to get to a place of blessing, those are the things we should be doing. But then the even-numbered verses talk about what God will do to bless a person who walks in that path of obedience. So in verse 2, it says, "For God's teachings will prolong your life many years and bring you peace and prosperity." What more could you want in life than a good, long life that's full of peace and prosperity and seeing the things that you do flourish? It says those things are the fruits of integrity. When we put God first, integrity bears that kind of fruit in our life. Verse 4 promises, "Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man." A couple of weeks ago for the character challenge, one of the concepts that we looked at was reputation. That's something that concerns all of us, isn't it? That I want to have a good name, that if people say Mark Adams, I'd like to think that there's good things associated with that. And I know you feel the same way about your name and your family and the people in your life. That when we live a certain way, we want for people to see us as people of integrity and character. Reputation, Proverbs teaches, is worth far more than riches. A good name is so much to be valued. It's another thing that we can receive from walking this path. In verse 6, "In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." This is, of course, following verse 5. "Trust the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight." One of the things that we want in life is control, isn't it? Don't you want to feel like you're in control of everything that's going on and that you have the ability to totally shape the direction and shape the path that you're on? But the truth is, what we need is not control, because we don't always know what's best for us. The thing that we really need is the hand of a reliable guide. And if you can hold on to the hand of God, even if you can't quite see where you're going or where you're walking, if you've got a guide who loves you, who will take you by the hand, it's as if you're walking on a straight path. And you can't see how it's straight, but when you're holding on to God's hand, He can get you where it is that you're needing to go. You can survive a treacherous road if you have a trustworthy guide. In verse 8, this will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. This is the response to shunning evil and fearing the Lord. If we leave evil out of our life and we turn away from it, we find a lot of personal healing. You know, the problem with being a person who's bent on wickedness is that you always have to remember a lot. There's a heavy burden that goes with doing wrong because you've got to cover your steps, you've got to cover your paths. If you told a lie, you've got to remember what you said and who you lied to, and you've got to have the right reactions at the right time to maintain a lie. You know, everything about walking in the path of evil, it really is a much heavier burden than just being a person who is upright, who honors the Lord. It says, when you walk uprightly and honestly, this will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. You want to be the kind of person who can sleep well at night, then have a clean conscience. Don't do things that would weigh on you and keep you awake. And then verse 10, then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine. That's what Jesus promised in the parable of the talents, wasn't it? You know, to the person whom God gives a lot, if we use those things that God has given us to turn around and serve God and honor God, He says, well, you've been trustworthy with a few things. I'm going to give you more things. But this is the promise. The barns will be filled to overflowing and your vats brimming over with new wine. So again, we've been kind of walking through this path, and we have the odd-numbered verses that talk about what we need to do, and then you have the even-numbered verses talking about what God will do in response. And so far, all that stuff in the even-numbered verses is sounding pretty good. And then we have a twist when we get to verse 12. It says, because the Lord disciplines those He loves, as a father, the son He delights in. So we're talking about honoring God and walking a path of uprightness and receiving all of God's blessings. But at the capstone of all these different blessings we could receive, He says how great it is to receive the gift of the Lord's discipline. That's a lot less appealing, isn't it? The discipline of the Lord for the person who is upright. But He says this is what a loving parent does for a child of whom they're especially proud. They place high expectations on them and push them to achieve great things. One of the most common things you bump into in the book of Proverbs is that imagery of discipline, isn't it? And most often it's associated with a rod, kind of harshly, right? A rod for the back of those who need to learn and to be wiser, to be more mature. So, something that I kind of dislike, I don't like it when speakers tell stories about their own accomplishments. So I am going to tell a story, and it's not the typical type of thing I would tell you, but I wanted to tell you this because it's a way I think I can say that this passage we're studying today really has been true in my own life. Specifically, I want to tell you the story of how I got to publish my first book. So several years ago, I saw a need in the area of, I feel like a lot of people have kind of looked at lots of little sections of the Bible, but a lot of adults, even adult Christians, don't really understand how the Bible all fits together and how the different books complement each other and kind of the overall flow of the story. And so when I was working at the last church I was in, Old Hickory, I decided to teach a Wednesday night adults class, and I was giving these big 12, 13-page handouts every week, and it was a really intensive type class where I was explaining how that all works. And the comment I kept getting from people was, you know, this material is really good, you ought to see about publishing it, which is a great compliment to receive. And so while I was living in Nashville, there was a monthly ministers' luncheon, and there's 40 or 50 of us who got together every month. And one of the guys who attended this lunch, his name is Tom, and he's an editor at one of the Christian publishing companies affiliated with Churches of Christ. And so I had all my handouts, I had them in a notebook, and I was going to try to get up the nerve to go and talk to Tom and say, Tom, I have this thing I worked really hard on. Do you think maybe you guys could consider letting me turn this into some kind of book for you? And I was as nervous as I could possibly be. And so I got my notebook together, and I went there to the lunch, and Tom was sitting there, and there was even a seat beside Tom, and I'm still kind of shaking as I think about it. I was so nervous, I went and sat on the opposite end of the room, and I didn't even say hi to him that day. I was so afraid. Like, what if he says no? What if he says it's not any good? And what if I've wasted my time or embarrassed myself or bother him? And so I thought about that. And then another month rolls around, and it's time for that first Monday minister's luncheon. And I was talking to Carolina, my wife, at the house that morning, and I was nervous. And I felt like I was needing some encouragement. And I said, I'm supposed to go to that lunch today, and Tom's going to be there, and I know that I need to talk to Tom, and I need to give Tom this notebook, but, I've been thinking, and maybe I just don't even need to do this. Like, maybe it's just a waste of his time, or I'm going to get on his nerves, and I don't know, what do you think? And so my wife looked me in the eyes and said, well, you better get over it. So I'm not putting up with you doing all these graduate school classes and writing all these papers and spending all this time for you to get all this together and then not do anything with it. Says you already know it's good. Everyone says it's good. Just give it to him, and if he doesn't like it, he doesn't have to publish it. You've got nothing to lose. I tell you what, you're going to go to that lunch today, and you are going to put that notebook in his hands, and if you don't do that, don't come home tonight. So, I went, I could tell you that day, if you were to ask me what I thought of my wife the first half of that day, I'm major pity party, right? Major pity party. I was needing to be comforted, and she was mean to me. So I was just all worried about this, and I went to the lunch, and I was so nervous about talking to Tom, but the only thing that made me more nervous than talking to Tom was facing my wife, right? So I did. I walked over to Tom, and kind of shaken, and I handed him the notebook and kind of explained what it was, and he said, oh, actually, we're getting ready to kind of revamp one of our adult curriculums. This could be a good fit for what we're doing. And so, sure enough, I got to take my material and rework it, and that became my first book. And then that went so well that the next year he reached out to me and said, would you like to do another? And I said, well, yeah. And so we picked a new topic, and I got started again. So in total, for 4 years, every year I got to publish a new book. That was a thing it was a joy for me. I loved doing that. And to fast forward a little bit, this is 9 years after that conversation. And just now, I got to finish up something I've been working on for Lipscomb University. They're revamping their Master's in Christian Ministry, and they reached out to me and gave me this great opportunity to help them reimagine some of their curriculum and work on some stuff. But the explicit reason why they told me they were asking me to help with this was they said, well, we know you've published some curriculum books, and you kind of understand how to divide up the content and do all this stuff. And so that was something that I love doing. It's a blessing, like it's a delight for me to get to do that. But I thought to myself, once I got that offer, I am so thankful that 9 years ago, in a moment of weakness and self-doubt, I had a wife that loved me enough to fuss at me and to tell me to get over myself, and that she was not content for me to settle for mediocrity in my life. That was significant. And here I am 9 years later, and Lady Wisdom continues to show up at my door and bring me gifts like the ones I'm still receiving because of one conversation. What did that feel like 9 years ago? I hated her response to me in that situation. That wasn't what I thought I wanted, but it was the thing that I needed. What does love look like? One of the things that love looks like is high expectations. High expectations. I've mentioned to you a book before, The Coddling of the American Mind. It's a book by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff. I would say, last time I mentioned it as a book I was going to read. I'm mentioning it now as a book that I have read. I think it's one of the most important books that's come out in the last 10 years. Really valuable insights on culture and some of the problems that we're having and what to do about these things. But one of the things they talk about in the book is that a lot of times one of our problems has been that we treat people as if people are fragile. You'd say, what are people like? Well, people are fragile, and they get nervous, and things are hard for them, and if it's hard for them, maybe we shouldn't make them do things because then that might make them uncomfortable. And in fact, when you do that to people in your life, whether it's your family members or your friends or whoever, when you lower expectations because of nervousness or anxiety, what you're actually doing is making them weaker than the situations. One of the great bits of wisdom in this book is that you don't prepare the road for the child, you prepare the child for the road. You don't change everything that's out there. You change them so that they're tough enough to be able to handle the things that life puts in front of them. So he says, people are not fragile. But what surprised me was, he says, people are also not merely resilient. Because you'd want to say, well, people are tougher than you think they are. That's true, but he says it's actually a step further than that. It's a word I had never seen used before. He says people are actually anti-fragile. We are the opposite of fragile. When you put us through things that are difficult for us, that we don't desire, that are struggles that we have to fight through and work for, it's those things that make us so much stronger. In fact, it's really healthy for us to push ourselves and to be challenged in life. One of the anecdotes he shares is that some parents, in trying to push back on this mentality of coddling children, they've even started putting together these parks where kids are allowed to go and play with stuff that's a little riskier. And so there's one park in particular where parents, you sign a little waiver and your kid can go in there and learn to use some different kinds of tools. And so he talked about visiting one of these places, and there's these two 10-year-old boys sitting on this thing, and they've got a hammer and nails and a piece of wood, and they're going to town with these hammers and nails. And what would you expect a 10-year-old's going to do when they start swinging a hammer? I mean, you already know where it's going, right? And sure enough, one of these kids, he watched him, he's swinging it, and then he takes a bad swing because he was swinging too hard, and he nails his thumb, and he's shaking his hand, and he kind of sucks his thumb and nurses it and cries a little bit, but what does he do? He picks back up the nail, and he's a little bit smarter about how he swings it the next time. But what's the end result of that experience? You got two 10-year-old boys who know how to use a hammer. Pain wasn't bad for him. Pain is something that can be a powerful teacher. Of the many ways that God blesses us, one of the greatest blessings is that He cares enough about us to discipline us. Hebrews chapter 12, I wanted to read this passage because this passage does absolutely reach back to the verses we've been looking at in Proverbs. Have you completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son? It says, "My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when He rebukes you, because the Lord disciplines the one He loves, and He chastens everyone He accepts as His son." Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as His children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you are not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? They disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in His holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. So we have this road laid out before us, and it's a hard road to walk because it looks like discipline. It involves allowing the Word of God to come and dwell deeply in our hearts, to be written on the tablets of our hearts. It involves us not thinking more highly of ourselves than we ought to. It involves us choosing to love God and to shun evil. It involves us choosing to honor God with the things that He's given us. But the place that this all takes us is to a harvest of righteousness and peace. It's like having Lady Wisdom show up at your door and bring you gifts. In your own life this morning, I wonder where it is that you need to listen to the discipline of the Lord. What are the ways that God has been trying to knock on your door and get your attention if you were willing to open the door and to listen to what He has to say? What are the changes that you know you need to embrace that you've been putting off that maybe today's the day you just need to quit putting those things off? If there's anything that we could assist you with this morning, whether it's a word of encouragement or prayer, perhaps even a mild rebuke, I don't know, it was good for me. But if there's anything that you need this morning, we'd love to have you come talk to us as together we stand and sing.